The U.S. Army runs about 450,000 active soldiers, backed by Abrams tanks, Apache attack helicopters, and rocket artillery that can hit a target dozens of miles away. That's the most advanced combined arms force on the planet. We're throwing it against 8 of the largest armies ever assembled in human history, ranked smallest to largest, so the numbers only get crazier from here. Max 2 armies per century. Each army fights at its historical peak. No upgrades, no time travel. Let's start. Match 1, the Morian Empire. Around 600,000 infantry, backed by 30,000 cavalry, 9,000 war elephants, and 8,000 chariots. This was ancient India's military superpower under Chandragupta Maurya, built on the remnants of the Nanda Empire's army. The same force so massive it made Alexander the Great's troops mutiny and refuse to march any further into India. The war elephants were the real weapon here, used in mass formations of up to 8 archers per elephant to smash through enemy lines and shatter morale. Even in ancient warfare, though, disciplined infantry with long spears found a brutal counter. Kill the mahout riding the elephant and the animal panics, sometimes trampling its own side in the chaos. That weakness only gets worse against modern weapons. A javelin missile or a few rounds of accurate rifle fire achieves the same result instantly. And elephants moving at a walking pace across open ground have no way to close on a force that can engage them from over a mile out. US Army wins this one, 99%. Match 2, Rome. At its peak, the Roman army numbered around 645,000 men, including legions, auxiliary troops, and the mobile field armies of the later empire. This is the force that conquered and held the largest empire of the ancient Mediterranean world for the better part of 5 centuries. Roman tactics were genuinely advanced for their time. By the era this 645,000 figure comes from, the legions had moved on from the gladius and testudo of the early empire, fighting instead with the longer spatha sword, thrusting spears, and a growing reliance on heavily armored cataphract-style cavalry to react fast across long, thinly held borders. None of that translates against rifles, machine guns, and air support. Massed infantry and cavalry advancing across open ground are exactly the kind of target artillery and air power were built to wreck. Their discipline and mobility made them deadly against anyone else in the ancient world. It does nothing against weapons that can kill from a mile away. US Army wins this one, 99%. Match 3, Napoleon's Grand Army. 685,000 men crossed into Russia in 1812. The largest army Europe had ever assembled up to that point. French, Polish, Austrian, Italian, and German troops marched together under Napoleon's personal command. Napoleonic armies fought in 3 main formations. The line spread soldiers out for massed musket volleys. The column moved troops quickly and could punch through weak points. And the square was the answer to cavalry, a tight box of bayonets that horses simply wouldn't charge into. That square formation was brilliant against 1800s cavalry. It is the single worst thing you could do against artillery, because it crams hundreds of men into a dense, stationary target. A column advancing across open ground fares no better against machine guns than it did against the muskets it was designed to beat. Just far faster and far more one-sided. Napoleon's own campaign in Russia already collapsed under supply failures in winter before it ever faced anything resembling a modern rifle. US Army wins this one, 98%. Match 4, Chin Dynasty, China. China's first emperor unified the country with an army that reached up to 1 million men once you count every soldier, garrison troop, and conscript across the empire. Individual campaigns alone sent armies of 500,000 or more into the field. And this is the dynasty whose fortifications became the foundation of the Great Wall. Qin forces were disciplined and surprisingly modern in organization, using mass-produced, standardized crossbows that let conscript soldiers achieve lethal accuracy with minimal training, something almost nobody else in the ancient world had figured out. It does nothing against an enemy who can see and engage from kilometers away using thermal optics and precision artillery. 1 million men advancing on foot still have to cross open ground to use a crossbow. and a modern force can shred that advance long before any of them are in range to fire back. US Army wins this one, 98%. Match 5, the Mongol Empire. At its absolute peak, the Mongol Empire could field over 1 million men across every territory it controlled, though individual campaign armies under Genghis Khan himself usually ran closer to 100,000 to 130,000 men. The Mongols built the largest connected land empire in history, and they did it through speed and tactics far more than raw numbers. This is the most dangerous historical matchup on tactics alone. Mongol horse archers fired composite bows with an effective range up to 350 yards, further than a typical English longbow, and they mastered the feigned retreat, pulling enemies into a chase before flanking riders closed in from both sides for a total encirclement. Against medieval armies, that tactic won empires. Against a modern force, the range math completely flips. Modern rifles and crew weapons engage accurately well beyond 1,000 yards, with thermal sights that work in total darkness, meaning Mongol cavalry would be taking fire long before their bows were even in range. Speed and mobility only matter if the enemy can't already see you coming. US Army wins this one, 99%. Match 6, the Taiping Army. During China's Civil War in the 1850s and 60s, the rebel Taiping Army grew to somewhere between 1 and 2 million soldiers, fighting against Qing imperial forces that themselves fielded over 1 million regulars. Historians sometimes call it the last great traditional war, fought right around the same years as the American Civil War. Most Taiping soldiers fought with swords, spears, bows, and jingals. Basically, oversized mobile wall guns rather than modern firearms. Wealthier Taiping units did smuggle in Western muskets, rifles, and field artillery. And by the early 1860s, their factories were reportedly producing better cannons than the Qing army could manage. That's a real technological step up from anything earlier on this list. But it's still mid-1800s gunpowder weapons with limited range and slow reload times. Against modern automatic weapons, armor, and air support, even a smuggled Western cannon from the 1860s is a museum piece. The numbers here are staggering, but staggering numbers backed by a 170-year-old gun still collapse fast against a modern combined arms force. US Army wins this one, 98%. Match 7, the Wehrmacht. By 1943, Nazi Germany's armed forces reached a peak strength of around 10 million men across the Army, Air Force, and Navy, with nearly 18 million serving across the entire war. This is the first army on this list that's a genuine 20th century industrialized military with tanks, aircraft, and modern infantry weapons. This is where the fight actually gets serious. German doctrine, popularly known as Blitzkrieg, combined tanks, motorized infantry, and close air support from Stuka dive bombers into fast, coordinated breakthroughs that could collapse entire fronts in days rather than months. That doctrine crushed Poland and France in record time, and German tank crews and pilots were some of the most experienced in the world by the war's later years. We have a real preview of how this kind of mismatch plays out. In the 1991 Gulf War, American tanks using thermal sights and longer-range guns engaged Iraqi T-72s, the closest thing to a real-world Panzer in modern combat, from up to 3 times the distance the Iraqis could even shoot back. The result was lopsided. Thousands of Iraqi tanks destroyed for barely over 30 American losses across the entire war. A 1943 Panzer Division would face the same problem against a force that can spot and kill it from beyond visual range before a single German shell gets close enough to matter. US Army wins this one, 92%. Match 8, the Soviet Red Army. At its peak in 1944 and 1945, the Red Army had around 12 million men under arms, with over 34 million serving across the entire war. This is the single largest army ever assembled in human history, and nothing else on this list comes remotely close. Soviet doctrine, known as deep battle, used massed artillery and infantry to punch a hole straight through enemy defenses, then poured tank armies through that gap to wreck supply lines and command posts deep in the rear. It's the same basic idea as Blitzkrieg, but on a much larger scale, and it's exactly what broke the Wehrmacht at Stalingrad and Kursk. 12 million men sounds unbeatable on paper, But deep battle still depends on finding and breaching a defensive line first. A modern force with satellite surveillance, drones, and precision strikes can see Soviet armies massing and start destroying tank columns and artillery batteries from beyond the range Soviet guns can answer. It's the same standoff advantage that let a handful of American tanks wreck entire Iraqi brigades in 1991, just stretched even further, since 1940s optics and radar are decades further behind. The Red Army's real advantage here isn't tactics or equipment. It's raw mass and the artillery saturation that comes with it, which is genuinely the most dangerous combination of this entire list. That's why this match gets the lowest percentage by far. US Army wins this one 87%. And what if the US Navy fought history's greatest fleets? That video is on your screen now. Thanks for watching.